Crime is crime, villains are villains, and they all need locking up. My name is Peter Bleksley. I'm a former Scotland Yard detective. Human trafficking and exploitation is a huge problem in the United Kingdom. People that are exploited include those who are fleeing the war in Ukraine and other people that travel to the UK in small boats. The numbers are on the rise. This problem is not going away, and it quite simply must be tackled. The criminal exploitation of adults has risen by 30% in the last year. And in recent months, the sexual exploitation of women has risen by 24%. Significant numbers and a considerable problem. Albanian gangs have got a firm grip on the drug dealing, predominantly cocaine, and they shamelessly recruit children into their ranks, where they exploit them by making them distribute the drugs on their behalf. These criminals will recruit migrants who have crossed the channel in small boats and suck them into their criminality. They also go to France, where they find rich pickings amongst the migrant camps for new recruits. They are ruthless, they are indiscriminate, and they don't treat these people like human beings, they treat them like commodities. The British Transport Police realised the scale of the problem of county lines drug dealing and set up a dedicated unit in 2019. Since then, they have arrested 2,250 people for this drug distribution network. 40% of those people arrested were under the age of 19, exploited with no choice but to be drawn, forced, cajoled, bullied and recruited into this criminality. When the county lines issue first came to light, the drugs that were predominantly being trafficked were heroin, cannabis, cocaine. But of late, another more odious drug, a more addictive drug, a more damaging drug, fentanyl, has been increasingly moved around the country. The National Crime Agency have had a long-running operation to tackle drug dealers called Operation Venetic. To give you an idea of the scale of the problem they are facing, a man called John Keat was arrested, who ran a drugs laboratory and a dealing network that netted £10 million a month. He and others were arrested and jailed and received considerable sentences. When it comes to sexual exploitation, young women and girls who have fled the war in Ukraine are, unfortunately, at risk, as are other young girls, many of whom have been through the care system, and others who come from what I describe as less than perfect home backgrounds. Children exploited for the sexual perversion of others. There have been a number of child exploitation scandals in this country in recent years, none more notorious than the Rotherham scandal. Unfortunately, people simply looked the other way because many of the offenders came from a particular minority background. Police officers did not do their job because they didn't want to be accused of being racist. Shame on them all. It has long been suspected that women and girls are being trafficked from Bulgaria into the southeast of London for sexual purposes, to be put into brothels and basically enslaved within the sex industry. Law enforcement have often discussed among themselves a Romanian mafia who are believed to be exploiting people, trafficking them into the UK, again for sexual purposes. The good news is law enforcement are aware of these gangs. The bad news is some of them still operate.
And the van's empty, buddy. Take a seat for me. Take a seat, mate.
Another very unsavoury aspect of human trafficking are people who exploit people through their labour. They force them to work in agriculture, hospitality, car washes, food processing, nail bars, whilst often keeping these people imprisoned in unsanitary, cramped and entirely unsuitable accommodation. Slavery in 2023 in the UK, it's almost beyond comprehension. Scotland has a drug problem all of its own, unfortunately, and a lot of its drugs come from Spain, the Netherlands, and even China. Although in the UK, Liverpool remains the city through which most of Scotland's drugs are trafficked. There are 6 organised crime groups operating north of the border that have been identified by law enforcement as being predominant in the illegal drugs industry. Like in so many other places, these gangs enforce their rules and protect their territory through violence. That is their currency. And as long as the drugs industry is left in their hands, this problem will continue. Since 2021, there has been a 300% increase in crimes related to brothels. The primary perpetrators and their victims are predominantly Slovakian or Romanian. When it comes to labour exploitation in Scotland, the victims are overwhelmingly from Vietnam, but also from Latvia and China. They are forced to work in nail bars, drug cultivation, in other words, cannabis farms, and agriculture. Those who exploit them are often from the same country as the victims. And of course, they have to move their money around that they earn illegally. And so they exploit the airports to shift the people in and move the money around. They also involve themselves in drug and cigarette importation. Of course, all illegal and all sold on the black market, invariably through people who are being exploited. In Northern Ireland, there is a notorious gang that call themselves the Firm. They like to think that they rule County Armagh, and they do have close links to the Kinahan cartel. And through their contacts, they distribute drugs, of course, for huge profit, but they also have their fingers in the pies of an awful lot of different types of crime. Another Northern Irish gang calls themselves the Russians gang, but they are predominantly Lithuanians. They have been responsible for an increase in heroin consumption and, of course, addiction and misery. They've utilised drone technology. Get your drugs delivered by drone, thereby cutting out the middleman. In Northern Ireland, those who are forced into the sex industry, trafficked into that industry, are often Romanian, Bulgarian, Albanian, and ethnic Roma. These gangs are known to have exploited social media platforms to recruit people. They lure them in. According to the latest figures from the Office of National Statistics, 550 people were exploited for labour purposes in Northern Ireland. Many of them were forced into shoplifting gangs, a very lucrative business, and others were used in the cultivation of illegal drugs, predominantly cannabis. Paramilitary groups that still exist in Northern Ireland are known to exploit children. With all the problems that the police service of Northern Ireland faces, that constant and very worrying terrorism threat, they now have these really quite modern, recent crimes to tackle with. The enslaving, the trafficking, and the exploitation of human beings. Fortunately, the government have acknowledged and do accept that human trafficking, modern slavery, is a problem. They've invested £10 million for research over a number of years so that law enforcement can better understand this problem. By understanding it, who commits the crime, who are the victims of this crime, then they will be better equipped to tackle it, to find those who are responsible, to free those people who are held captive in the most disgusting environments. There is a responsibility upon us all to ensure that we do not become victims of crime. Look out for those who may be vulnerable in your community. Children, those who are out a lot, those who get excluded from school, or those who don't go to school very much of their own accord. That is when gangs will prey upon them. That is when they are at their most vulnerable. That is when they will be exploited and potentially enslaved. Look out for yourselves, but look out for your fellow human beings.